just like Maiden, they're obsessed with Maiden.
They are the kind of kings. Iron Maiden reign supreme.
They have a real love of their music, and I think there's a respect for the fans. And I think Iron Maiden have understood that, and that's really why they're still here.
They've always been sensational live. They're impossible not to be bowled over by.
They're the biggest metal band in the world.
With sales near the 90 million mark and a career spanning over 4 decades, Iron Maiden are giants of the metal scene. The band grew out of London's East End in the early 70s, when bassist Steve Harris tried to find the right musicians to suit his ambitious musical ideas.
Iron Maiden had a fairly insalubrious start. They played in a pub called the Cart and Horses in Stratford pretty much every week. It was bassist Steve Harris's band, and there were lots and lots of different people in the band.
They slowly built up a following until they met a DJ called Neil Kay, who recorded the Soundhouse tapes with them. These tapes, which were kind of very raw quality, eventually managed to get some record company interest after they'd signed to their incredibly influential manager, Rod Smallwood.
I think they started getting loads of gigs after this demo, and eventually, I think it sold out just in a number of weeks, which was incredible. And I think then they got people started picking up notice of this band, and they were signed to EMI after that.
With the singer Paul Di'Anno, Iron Maiden released their self-titled debut album in 1980. Lead single Running Free wore the band's early influences on its sleeves.
Running Free, you can definitely hear some of Maiden's punk influences in there. It's got a simpler arrangement than a lot of the later Iron Maiden stuff would have had.
There are 2 guitar solos on it. One's a very, very traditional heavy metal guitar solo, and the other is a punk solo, the sort of thing that you would find on an Eddie and the Hot Rods record or even a Sham 69 record. And at that moment, you can hear the 2 competing strands in early Iron Maiden together. Its energy is still infectious.
Running Free was not only a debut for the band, but also for their mascot, Eddie.
Eddie, he sounds likeable, doesn't he, because he's called Eddie. But yeah, he appeared on most of, I'd say about 98% of the band's releases on the front cover, and started off apparently as a paper mache head in the backdrop.
And they began referring to it as the Ed, like the head with a London accent. And then from there it became Eddie. And then when it came time to sort of design the first album cover, Rod Smallwood, the band's manager, got an artist called Derek Riggs to turn it into a drawing.
He's great, Eddie, because he can just transform himself to anything, you know. So he could be a sort of lunatic in a mental institution, or he can be, you know, a soldier in, you know, in some horrific battle, or he can even be sort of, you know, pulling the strings of the devil himself. And so, you know, Eddie's just great.
He's also their visual representation, which is particularly handy if you've got a band whose lineup often changes. So if you see Eddie, you know that is Iron Maiden's corporate stamp.
The debut and its follow-up, Killers, saw the group quickly build a solid fan base.
I think in the early days of Maiden, rock music and heavy rock music and progressive rock had died a bit of a death by that point. They'd been sort of killed off by punk and killed off by disco. And I think what Maiden managed to do that no one else was doing is they managed to take these progressive elements with their time changes and you know, kind of harmonisation and things like that, and then these more sort of punk elements with Paul Di'Anno's vocals, and they managed to mix that with the hard rock stuff and create something that was quite unique.
But that album, Killers, had a couple of instrumental tracks on it, actually. So suddenly it was like quite a considered but beautiful chaos and mayhem. But it was loud, but it was considered, and you could, from day one, from the early days, really hear that quality that they had that many others didn't.
The world is saturated with love songs, and Iron Maiden come along and they write the song called The Murders of the Rue Morgue, which is based on the Edgar Allan Poe story. Steve Harris was, you know, reading novels and, you know, fantasy novels or you know, horror or science fiction stories, or he was, you know, reading about events in history or all this stuff, and he was writing songs about it, and that was great.
Despite success building for the band, Iron Maiden had to part ways with singer Paul Di'Anno in 1981.
Paul Di'Anno had a few problems with alcohol and cocaine, apparently, and he has been quoted as saying that it wasn't just a bit here and there, he was like on 24-hour binges.
I think the band had already spotted who they wanted for the replacement before they got rid of Paul. I think they spotted Bruce Dickinson from Samson, this kind of really great band, and the manager met him at Reading and then kind of auditioned him and signed him up immediately, and he became part of Iron Maiden.
Bruce Dickinson, on the surface, was a very unlikely recruit to the Iron Maiden army. He was a very well-spoken, posh public schoolboy who spent much of his weekends fencing in a leisure centre in Rotherham. He was well-spoken in a way that the others were sort of cockney geezers. However, the thing about Bruce Dickinson was that he sounded like an air raid siren, and that's what Steve Harris wanted for the band.
I think Run to the Hills is kind of the perfect introduction to Bruce Dickinson's voice. I mean, when you hear the beginning bit and he's already singing quite high, you know, in the kind of intro verse, and then it gets higher.
Run to the Hills was absolutely massive, and it was kind of, I don't know if I should imitate it. It's kind of, 1, 2. I can't do it. I can't begin to get up there. It was so ridiculous, you know, about this kind of, you know, this attack on the Indians, and it was just, it felt completely over the top. And, you know, with this powerhouse singer over it, it was just, you know, it was great.
They could become more complex with their structures, their strong structures. They could really push themselves, like he did with his vocals. He has huge range, and he really could push himself with those vocals, and as a result, their music making became better.
The single Run to the Hills introduced the new lineup, along with the new album, The Number of the Beast. Spooky stories surrounding the recording of the LP found their way to the newsstands.
In my old dreams, was the reflections of my Walkman staring back at me.
Tale goes is that their engineer, Martin Birch, crashed his Range Rover into a minibus or a van carrying a load of nuns, and the repair bill came to £666, 666 being the Number of the Beast, which by remarkable coincidence was the title of the album Iron Maiden were recording at the time.
People thought they were Satanists in America. There were some people very religious groups who believed that, you know, this was the devil music. So they ended up smashing their records, and there was a bit of controversy about it. I mean, ultimately, it's all been great for the mythology of the record, and it's actually made them look cooler.
Iron Maiden are possibly the least satanic people that you could ever imagine, not least since their drummer, Nico McBrain, is a committed Christian. And the Number of the Beast, it came when Steve Harris had been watching The Omen 2. It was about a dream. They weren't anointing the Lord of Darkness. They were just messing about.
The Number of the Beast made Iron Maiden global superstars. To date, it has sold 14 million copies. Follow-up album Peace of Mind saw another change in the band's lineup though, with the departure of drummer Clive Burr. With Nico McBrain behind the Skins, the band toured extensively and broke America.
This is still quite early on in their career with Flight of Icarus. To really break America that early on, with not a huge amount of support, loads of fan loyalty and love, and just word of mouth, that's extraordinary.
As he spreads his wings and shouts at the crowd, in the name of God, my Father, I'll fly.
The Iron Maiden live experience it's remarkable. You can feel how people feel so passionate about them. And that this music, which is very English in terms of its lyrics, and they're very English in terms of people, how it has this globe-straddling connection with people. And they've always been sensational live.
One of the things that Iron Maiden did, they made the concert fun again, you know, because big rock concerts had become kind of rather serious affairs almost, you know, and they understood, especially with, you know, heavy metal fans and kids going to see them, that they want a spectacle. And I think that, you know, heavy metal has always been good on spectacle. It's always been unapologetic about spectacle. It's never had a problem with it.
In 1984, Iron Maiden released Power Slave. The album furthered the band's musical ambitions.
Power Slave didn't do as well as Peace of Mind, but at this time, Iron Maiden were all about consolidating their global position, and it had a quarter-of-an-hour version of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which showed how they could expand and develop and go even a little bit prog. And then on the other hand, it had 2 Minutes to Midnight, which was essentially a 6-minute long pop song.
2 Minutes to Midnight, which was, again, it was completely frantic, and it was a perfect pop song. The thing is about Iron Maiden is it seems aggressive, but it's not really aggressive. It's very there's nothing threatening about Iron Maiden. It's actually kind of good fun. And I think that was really the key to their appeal.
Iron Maiden continued to develop their sound with their next 2 albums, Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son of a Seventh Son.
So I think for Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, it was interesting because they started really adapting their music and the way they made music. There were more textures to it, more layers, and they were trying out synthesized bass and guitars.
There were early models like the Synthax and the Roland GR700 were kind of really big, popular guitar synths back then. And the way it works is you basically you have a MIDI pickup on your guitar which picks up each string individually and sends them over to a processor and a synthesizer, which then turns it into kind of musical notes.
The heavy metal world is all about being authentic and true metal and everything, and you know the idea of synthesizers were probably seen as pretty infra dig. But again, it's part of their pop nous, you know, and understanding how to kind of coin these radio hits and capture the sound of the moment. So you know, it worked for them.
A radio hit came in the form of Can I Play With Madness? It entered at number 3 in the UK charts.
Can I play with madness? The perfect stare at its crystal ball. Can I play with madness? There's no vision there at all.
Can I Play With Madness? As soon as you hit play on that, you know, people's like pints are in the air and they're singing along. It's so theatrical, this music, I think, and so you can just sing along with it. It's easy to pick up, it's easy to hear what they're saying. It's just a really brilliantly written song. It's a huge hit for them.
I love it, and I find it just makes me smile when I hear it, actually. And I love the idea of this kind of man with a crystal ball telling a young boy kind of his future. It's kind of weird and kind of fits with Maiden in a way.
Can I Play With Madness, with its video featuring Monty Python's Graham Chapman, was probably their poppiest moment.
There are a lot of the kind of classic Maiden traits in Can I Play With Madness. Weirdly though, it's one of the songs that has one of the shortest guitar solos in a Maiden song. Whereas they normally have 1 or 2 guitar solos. It's quite a short song, and there's only a kind of glimpse of a guitar solo in there. It's great.
During a break from touring, Bruce Dickinson wrote a solo song, Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter. Steve Harris requested that Iron Maiden re-record the song, giving the band their first ever #1 single. It gave Dickinson a taste for creative freedom outside of Maiden.
He was approached by a label to produce a soundtrack to Nightmare on Elm Street 5. And originally they just wanted him to do 1 song. So he got together with Yannick Gers, who would later go on to join Maiden. And they recorded Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter. When he played it to the label, they asked him if he could just give them a whole album worth of material.
Bring your daughter to the
because he had some of his material rejected for Somewhere in Time, and because he'd written their #1 single, Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter, and hadn't really got the credit that he deserved within the band for that, then he began to look elsewhere.
I think Bruce Dickinson worked on a solo album mainly because he was frustrated. A lot of his songs were being rejected. He was writing as many songs as Steve Harris, the bassist, whose band it really was.
So he announced, or the band announced more accurately, that he was going to leave after the real live tour. At the end, the final gig, which was at Pinewood Studios, then the magician Simon Drake actually killed Bruce. Not literally, of course, but as part of a magic trick. And that sort of summed up the end.
By the end of the tour, Bruce left Iron Maiden, as had guitarist Adrian Smith. In 1994, former Wolfsbane singer Blaze Bayley successfully auditioned for the role, and the band recorded the albums The X Factor and Virtual 11 with the new singer.
I think that it worked to a degree. I think Bruce was quite a difficult role to fill, and I think once people have got their favourite band, they've got their favourite singer, especially a frontman, I think it's a really tricky thing to carry on as a band with a different frontman.
There were some good moments on the later albums with Blaze Bayley, and I think he did a pretty admirable job of filling in the shoes of Bruce Dickinson.
He was there for 6 years, which is a long time. Virtual 11 is very downbeat, partially because Steve Harris was going through a divorce at the time.
It was a bit ponderous, they didn't feel as fun.
I think it was quite a diplomatic kind of parting of ways with Blaze Bayley. The band just invited Bruce at that point to come back, and then all of a sudden you've got the classic Iron Maiden lineup kind of reunited and back together.
Dickinson and Smith rejoined Iron Maiden in 1999, and a year later released the record Brave New World, led by the single The Wicker Man.
With Bruce came Adrian Smith, so therefore, when the two of them came together, it meant that Bruce had an ally, and the balance in the band was much more equal than it had ever been before. They suddenly sounded fantastic.
There wasn't a lot of kind of classic metal in rock and metal at that point. It would turn to the sort of new metal kind of movement, and there weren't guitar solos, and there was a lot of kind of a hip-hop influence in rock and metal. And I think the classic Maiden lineup returning and kind of coming back with a new album, I think it was just set ready for them to do it.
I love Brave New World. I think it's great. And the band are back with Bruce. He's such a talented vocalist. They're able to push themselves musically. It's a very ambitious record, very complex, great record, great return.
Rock and roll is supposed to be a chaotic business. The deeper you get into Iron Maiden, the less chaos, the more efficiency there is. They're certainly the only major band whose lead singer has flown a transport plane around the world and then played gigs. Bruce Dickinson has been a long-term qualified pilot who's flown commercial airlines, as well as being a singer, author, etc., etc.
Brave New World began a second wave of success for Iron Maiden, with each following album charting highly. The band's interest in war seemed relevant against the background of the Iraq and Lebanon conflicts.
Iron Maiden have always had this thing of writing songs about historical events, which is generally not particularly popular subjects, and I kind of admire them for it. And I think with the later albums, you found it even more. I mean, it gets a little bit ridiculous, So, for example, on Dance of Death, there's a song about the Cathar conquest of 1244. I've never thought of them as a kind of politically motivated band or a band motivated by anger at war or anything. I think it's more kind of fascination with war.
They incorporate a lot of religious imagery, a lot of literary imagery as well. They're very clever lyricists. And I think this was just another example of that, really. They were kind of looking at the world around them, incorporating war. So, yeah, they've always been that kind of band.
Iron Maiden continue to be one of the world's biggest metal acts. Their 2010 release, The Final Frontier, entered at #1 in 28 countries.
There were some very complicated ideas and musical structures on it, but the important thing, I think, is possibly the only album ever to be simultaneously #1 in Saudi Arabia and Croatia, which shows just how the Iron Maiden fires haven't dimmed.
It's like a massive record. I think it's like 76 minutes long. It's an opus, but it's a really strong piece of work.
Iron Maiden's influence on metal is just massive. There are entire subgenres that have stemmed because of Iron Maiden, with power metal and symphonic metal, and it's all because of them.
They have a real love of their music, and I think there's a respect for the fans. It's almost like a community, which is kind of self-contained. And I think Iron Maiden have understood that, and that's really why they're still here.
They make good music, they sell out stadiums, and they sell loads of records. That's what it's supposed to be about.